Okay, this is Wooyeong Chu. I'm, as I mentioned before, from the Dr. Owen, and I'm working at the National Institute of Ecology, located in Seocheon. Um, my research topic is about the ecosystem services. Actually, the Dr. Shin mentioned very briefly about this ecosystem services as importance of the biodiversity, and today I'm going to go through some of the details of what's the actually value and the assessment of ecosystem services at the global and some South Korea, and how actually we can apply for the concept of ecosystem services in the policy and our real life. So, and first, before I start my presentation, first, I'm very honored and pleased to have an opportunity to present my research and projects in 2023 ILAS Korea University of Foreign Studies third international conference, and then it's a great honor for me. So, and then my topic is about the assessment and policy of South Korea's national ecosystem services. And in the background of my first page is about the on the left side, there's a very old map of the Korea. It's 1861 is that drawn and then mapped. And then you can see that there's like a the green line is actually, you can see this is we call the Baekdu Daegan. It's a Baekdu mountain range. And then I try to like a metaphor to this. There's one of the largest mountain range in the Chile. It's the Andes mountain range. So we have like a small, like a mini concept of this mountain range of the Chile in the mountains. So there's some common things actually in Chile and Korea. So that's why I want to show that some the maps, old maps, and then some landscapes in the background. So let's start it. Okay, today I'm going to introduce what's the concept of the ecosystem services and how you can assess and value the ecosystem services, and then how we are doing that in South Korea, and then we call the South Korea's ecosystem services assessment. And then finally, I'm trying to introduce and explain about how actually we can apply and implement the ecosystem services, the results and value into this our policy, so that actually people can like realize, or people can actually feel that the ecosystem services reach in real life. So first, there's four charts in the slides, and then on the left side, there's we call the living planet indexes. So you may hear from the WWF. This is one of the famous the indices to show that how actually the biodiversity decreases. I mean, Dr. Shin actually mentioned that before, how actually that all species or endangered species are changing, but this is the more targeting about this global birth rates. They are investigated and estimated for over 4,000 species and more than 20,000 individuals, and track down how they actually change it over the time. And then if you say that indexation 100 in 1970s, now we are actually, it's only just over 30%. So we are actually 60% of loss of the mammals and fishes, birds and amphibians and reptiles. And on the bottom of the left, then you can also see that there's I mean, it is very shocked. I mean, you should look at this statistics, and then all mammals on Earth, it's 96% are living livestock and humans, and only 4% of wildlife is actually exists. So we are this in terms of like weight and in the population. So you can see how actually the friends actually is the bird rates are the mammals are actually disappeared because of their loss of energy, loss of food, and loss of some habitats. On the right side, and then you can see this is how human, if you are more actively the more earn money or produce some some materials, and then we are losing our natural capital. So you can see that there's a real opposite of some relationship between the productive capital and the natural capital over the past 20 years. And probably I'm going to explain little detail in later, but the ecological footprint is one of the great indicator for the ecosystem services. But if you have a more ecological footprint, which means you can actually consume more some materials like carbons and food, energy, or some timbers and fishes, and you can actually some wealth of some developed countries like high GDP countries has some or very high ecological footprints. So you can see that some increases over the time. So there's a high relationship between the human activity and economy and the decrease in biodiversity. So that's why the ecosystem services terms came out. You can see that there's only the components before the ecosystem services occurred. One is we call ecosystem biodiversity on the left side, and the other side is human well-being, the society or some economic systems. There's a very conflict. You can say conservation ecosystem, or you developed or some the industrialized or developed country. But there's no link, or there's no relationship between the two components, between the ecosystem and social and economic systems. So that's why we are still keep losing the natural assets or ecosystem biodiversity. And since we are increasing more benefit, economic benefits or monetary benefits. So, but if we are losing some natural assets, actually your life, the quality of life is actually very degraded because of like a low quality of the air, low quality of water, and less of, I mean, it's you can also see that a lot of high like some disasters that came out. So that's why ecosystem services actually tells us about there's high linkage between the nature biodiversity and the human systems. So if you are very healthy and the abundance of natural assets, we are actually we can have a more the high quality of some lifestyle. So that's why ecosystem services is provided as the bridge between the natural asset and the human well-being. So I mean, this is the way of you can actually the value and estimate the ecosystem services. Once you actually know that there's some basic of some ecology of some ecosystems and biodiversity on the left side, you can quantify or you can calculate the ecosystem services as the crops or timbers, water supply, and climate regulation and pollinations and noise regulation and some aesthetics views. And then you can also come up with some real like a good of some from the ecosystem services if you put some more human capital. So from the crops, you can actually convert to the food. From the timber, you can actually have like a desk and table. The water supply, from water supply to some drinking water, or providing water to some agriculture and industrialization, some of that. And then finally, we can actually value as the economic valuations, or you can also you can convert to some health the value, or sometimes you can have some social value. So that's why we can understand, and then we can actually put the value or high weights on the ecosystem services as a way of this process. But right now, what I'm trying to say is not only the valuation or valuation or estimation of ecosystem services. We are more focused on the assessment of ecosystem services. Assessment means this is the process of a whole of some systems. So which means this is the ecosystem services from the nature. If we have a more ecosystem services, you can have a better quality of life. But if we are losing some biodiversity and the value, then we are also losing the ecosystem service. Then we can probably very poor some quality of life. So And then we have to find some drivers of the why that some of the which makes the nature is less degraded and then lost. Then we can actually converse that where we can reduce the drivers, where we can actually remove the drivers so that we can have some better nature. Then finally we can have a better, we can have a more abundant ecosystem services. Finally we can have a global level. So this whole process we understand better, then we can actually have a whole system is like a circulation. So that's why we can call that this is assessment of a biodiversity and ecosystem services. So now we are focusing on some more assessment rather than just estimation of ecosystem services. So now is it that terms is exchanging is over the time, especially in Latin America, like Chile, they are more focusing on the not only for the supporting, regulating cultural provisioning services, they are more focusing on like a mother earth, like a holistic view. This is very important in Chile and in Latin America. They are considering some ecosystem services as like a big picture. So now we can call this some so including the ecosystem services, mother earth, whole things we can call the nature's contribution to people, like NCP. So now in the IPAS is called NCP or some ecosystem services. Either term they're using both. Still not figure out it's as a one term. I'm just skip that this IPAS global assessment because Dr. Shin already mentioned it before. So I mean, this is one of the very iconic reports. It came out in 2019. This is a global assessment on biodiversity and ecosystem services. We are losing a lot of some species. Also, we are losing a lot of some forests and wetlands, and then some of the because of big drivers like climate change and land degradations, invasive species, and so on. As an example, there's the value of wetlands. Only 6% of the world's land is covered by the wetland, but there is more than 30% of the value of global ecosystem services in overall, including food, fresh water, protection from erosion, natural hazard, and pollutions. This is a kind of the one example of how actually we value that the ecosystem services in wetland areas. In the report of the IPAS in 2019, they estimate 18 ecosystem services past 50 years, how they actually change it over the time. But you can see since 1970s, material NCP or ecosystem services, like including food, bioenergy production, and materials have increased. However, 14 out of 18 NCP or ecosystem services have declined because of so much increase in materials. Then actually we are losing a lot of some regulating and non-material like cultural services. So that's why that's IPAS global assessment came out. Now it's a Kunning Montreal GBF. Finally it's released because of this scientific evidence. They can come out the very scientific very indicators and targets they can come out. So there's a 23 targets GBF, but in global B, particularly targeting on the ecosystem services, how they can actually maintain and or enhance the ecosystem services over the 10 years. In goal D was how to actually implement the biodiversity and value in policies. So for example, we can reduce some negative impacts on biodiversity, like subsidies, and then how to increase the positive incentives for biodiversity, and so forth. Now I'm trying to briefly introduce about the ecological footprint. Now we have a 1.75, actually exactly, so 75 Earths, we are actually using it, including energy as a carbon, and then materials and timber and food, seafood. So we only have a 1 Earth, but we are now using the 1.75 Earth, which means there's you are using the minus the bank account. This is over 0.75 is only for is the accumulated over the past history of Earth, And also this is the assets for the next generation. So we are using so overused of the ecological assets. You can see the North Hemisphere using a lot of biological deficit, and then the green means like an ecological reserve. So a lot of the North Hemisphere using a lot of the biological reserve because of using a lot of the carbon. That's why we are have a lot of biological deposit. South Korea only biocapacity is 0.6, but we are using a 6.3. Japan is less than Korea, but still using a lot. But Chile, unfortunately, until 2010, they are actually more than positive of bio reserve, but now actually it's turned to be some biodeposit. It's unfortunately the Brazil is still decreasing, but eventually they are getting to the close to equal to biocapacity and bioecological footprints. But you can also see a very interesting point after we are experiencing COVID pandemic. 2019 is 1.75 years, but after 1 year during the pandemic period, actually we are using less the ecological footprint 1.6. So you can actually see that we are very suffer from the COVID-19, but we can have some lessons that we are using some less energy or carbon for materials, then actually we are supporting the Earth's biocapacity, ecological capacity for the Earth. Now we turn to some assets for the South Korea. We have over 100,000 square kilometers in total. The forest covers like 64%, and agricultural land is about like 19%, and the rest of a very small land of some fresh water and coastal areas. We have now it's changing a little bit, but now Dr. Shin has already mentioned that in South Korea have we have recorded in 45 more than 45 species in 7 different taxa, and Dr. Shin already mentioned that we have 282 species listed endangered species, including flying squirrels and red crowned cranes, martins, and river otter. And also you can see that some very diversity of some landscapes we have, as probably you traveled in Korea, like a lot of some mountain ranges with the temples and royal azalea blossoms. And then also in winter time, you can see a lot of some snows in the top. But now we have a very beautiful and very diverse landscapes and biodiversity, where we're losing a lot of some ecosystem assets. Like we are still increasing over areas doubled from the 80s, but we are still losing land and a lot of agricultural land. So now we are time to think about how actually we can assess our Korea's national ecosystem services. Our objective is to try to assess some past trends and current status of the ecosystem and their services, and try to find what's the indirect and direct drivers for the biodiversity and ecosystem services. We are trying to also see some temporal trends past 30 years, and then how they change it. And then we are probably focusing on more 7 different covers, including forest and agricultural land, urban areas, forest, water, and so on. This is our conceptual framework of how to assess our ecosystem services, and questioned about how actually it changed over the time from the nature to ecosystem services, and then how affected some human well-being, and then what are the direct drivers and indirect drivers. And those are to answer the questions. Our Korea's National Ecosystem Services Assessment, the report we released in 2024. And this is a timeline we have. We are seeing a lot of some assess the processes going on from the now, but hopefully we can have release the final report in 2024 in our first Korea's National Ecosystem Services Assessment report. So this is the implication of our KNASA, which is this is the first assessment of the ecosystem services in South Korea, and providing very science-based synthesis of the status and changes various ecosystems, so that we can finally increasing mainstreaming ecosystem services on different cross sectors in South Korea. Those are the different the indicators are listed for the National Ecosystem Services Assessment. The highlighted the colors are the indicators. So we are really focused on the key indicators, six key indicators we are now working on 2024. Hopefully we can have some more indicators assessed in the until 2024. These are some examples or the preliminary results of the some valuation of our ecosystem services. So you can see that some of the how much we can actually produce some crops and livestock and wood products, and how much we can actually provide some fresh water and then natural medicine. So these are some quantification as a biophysical the yields, and then this is the units of the how actually calculated. And also same thing about those regulating services we estimated. And you can see that some carbon fluxes, how much actually we observe that the carbon emission from the air. So the forested land is actually, we actually observed that 47,000 tons of the CO2 every year, which means like about like a 6% of the CO2 emissions in South Korea per year. This is how we change it over the time. You can see that some forest areas are still observing the frost, but it's over the time that the slope is actually decreasing. So we are a little worried about the rates of the absorption of CO2 is decreasing because of the last we are developing some forest land, and that's the reason is one of the director drivers of the losing of the rates of the CO2 absorption. And this is how it changes over the time. So cultural ecosystem services South Korea. Now we are about 45,000 more visitors in their visitors are visiting the national parks. And this is the showing that how actually the different indicators are changed over the time. And then this is a different ecosystem types. And then some crops are decreasing and increasing, but probably like we have a very same trends of the global, like we have an increasing in provisioning services, but we have a maintaining or someone losing some regulating some services over the time. But we haven't finished the results yet. This is some estimation of some results. We finally released the final results in the 2024. I'm thinking I'm actually taking a lot of some time, so I'm trying to finish up my presentation in a couple of minutes. Sorry about that. This is how we actually, but it's like we try to draw and map some ecosystem services and different areas. And this is Seoul. And this is the process of how actually to map from the data from the field, and then come up with some methodology, and then how to actually validate this methodology of this mapping the process. And then you can see that you can see some of some county level. We can see some of some details about how ecosystem services actually distributed in over the locations. And we have a different indicators, and then we can come up with some bundles to which areas have some provisioning services, and then the vice versa, and we have some less regulating and cultural services, so that people, especially for the government officers or local, the government can have a better understanding how the ecosystem services distributed at the different level of different locations. And this is one of the best example of how actually value of some forest ecosystem services in South Korea. This value of a forest ecosystem service is about $195 billion in 2018, which means like about more than 10% of GDP in South Korea right now. And they've come up with some 12 different indicators. From the 12 indicators, we come up with some value of some how much is the people can benefit from the forest ecosystem services. And then we come up with some guidelines how to utilize the value and estimate and assess the ecosystem services at the national, local, and site level. And finally, I just very briefly introduced about how actually we can implement the ecosystem services into our policy. The aim or the goal of the implement ecosystem services and natural policy is to stop the loss of the biodiversity and ecosystem services. So no net loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services. We have a very good systems or policy which is called environmental impact assessment, but still we are losing the biodiversity values. Even though we tried hard avoidance and minimize restoration from the environmental impact assessment, still we have a minus of the biodiversity values. Now we are trying to put the some offset of the biodiversity, the negative biodiversity values. So if you are develop some land, you have to actually compensate some of the land or restore the land the same amount of the value of the biodiversity you developed. So this is how we can keep the stop or the halting the value of the biodiversity ecosystem services. So now it's ecosystem services is the legal term from the 2019 by the revising the law of the conservation use of biodiversity. So we have put the definitions and then how to assess the ecosystem services. And then you have to, when you come up with this national strategy, you have to put the status of biodiversity and the ecosystem services together. And then you have to implement the payment for ecosystem services, which I really want to emphasize on this presentation. Payment for ecosystem services in South Korea, now it's about the $7.7 million. It's not huge amount of the money now, but I mean, we're still increasing. Now these about 30 counties, local residents or local governments are implementing the payment for ecosystem services. There's some difference like compensation payment for in the river basin management. So if you are using the water in the big cities, and then you have to pay them. And then this is one of the examples of the payment for ecosystem services, like a spreading of rice straws in DMZ areas and providing water for cranes the rest area. And then no harvest of rice for hooded cranes in Suncheon area. Now it's Suncheon is as a ecological cities. This concept is they try to put the green infrastructure in the Suncheon cities. This is the areas for they are no harvesting is of rice in as the payment for ecosystem services. Now you have some buffer zones, have some more the protecting areas for the crane, and also they try to increase some green infrastructures. So the city is more concentrated in this area. So this is how actually they are designed their city as some green infrastructure becomes some more ecological city. Now we are back to some ecological footprint. Why ecosystems matters. If we are still keep going that just transacts, probably in 2030 we are ended up like a 2.0. We are using the ecological footprint. We are using 2.0 Earth, but we put a lot of some ecosystem conservation efforts or a lot of some protection efforts. Then we have to decrease that the increase of the ecological footprint as 1.4. Eventually we go to like a 1.0 Earth. We are using it. Okay, thank you for your attention. I'm sorry about this a little lengthy of my presentation, but thank you. Yeah.